Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room buzzed with voices, low, confident, almost careless maps spread across the long steel table, coffee cups abandoned in corners, papers with targets and coordinates fluttering under the ceiling fan. But no one looked at her. Not really. Not the way you look at someone who belongs. She kept her eyes fixed on the screen at the front, though she wasn't listening to the words. Her chest rose slow, heavy, the sound of her own breathing louder than the colonel's voice. She clenched her hands under the table where no one could see. Small, almost invisible tremors ran through her fingers. Fear. The old, familiar kind. The kind she had learned to hide. They called her by rank when they needed to. Cold, clipped. Just a word, not a name. And then they went back to circling their own voices around each other, planning missions, talking strategy, laughing about things only brothers in arms seemed to understand. But she wasn't here for their laughter. She was here because she carried something heavier, something she didn't speak of, not yet. Outside, the sun hammered the desert sky white. Through the briefing room's windows, the heat blurred everything into a trembling haze. The horizon looked like it could swallow you whole. Somewhere out there, beyond those walls, beyond that heat, a mission was waiting. A mission no one wanted to lead. That was why she was here. The colonel's pointer tapped on a glowing red circle on the screen. This sector. Intelligence says the convoy will pass through just before dawn. We take them out here. Quick, clean. His eyes flicked to her once, barely a second, before moving on, as if she were just another seat at the table. But she saw it, that hesitation, that doubt. They all had it. Her throat felt dry, but she swallowed anyway. She wanted to speak, but words pressed against her chest like stones. And still she said nothing. Not yet. Instead, she remembered. She remembered the last mission, the way the night had cracked open with gunfire, the way sand had carried the smell of burned oil and blood. She remembered faces, too many to count, and the silence that followed, a silence that haunted her dreams. They didn't know, couldn't know, because she hadn't told them. Her chair creaked as she leaned forward, finally speaking. Just one sentence, quiet, deliberate. Who's going to cover the ridge line? The room fell still for a second, maybe two. Then voices returned, louder than before. Someone chuckled, someone else muttered, "She worries too much." The colonel didn't answer. Not directly, he just said, "We'll manage." But they wouldn't. She knew it. That ridge line would be the difference between life and death. She pressed her lips together. Courage wasn't loud. It didn't slam fists on tables. It didn't shout for attention. Courage was quieter. It breathed through clenched teeth, through pounding heartbeats. Courage spoke when it mattered most. She knew she would take the ridge line herself. Later, when the meeting dissolved into murmurs and shuffling chairs, she stayed seated, watching the others file out, watching their shoulders shake with private jokes, watching them pretend not to notice her. Only one man lingered, a young corporal, eyes too tired for his age, the kind who carried invisible weight. He glanced at her, hesitant, then looked away before he could be caught caring. She almost smiled, almost, but the weight in her chest didn't allow it. When the room was finally empty, she let herself exhale. Her shoulders slumped, just for a moment. She pressed her palms flat against the table, grounding herself. And in that silence, she whispered, to no one, to the ghost of someone she couldn't forget, "I'll make it right this time." The ghost didn't answer, but the promise echoed inside her. That night, sleep wouldn't come. She lay on the thin cot, staring at the ceiling fan slicing the air into restless whispers. Every creak of the bass outside sounded louder, sharper, like a clock counting down to something inevitable. Her mind replayed the same scene, the ridge line, her scope, her heartbeat pressing against her cheek as she lay in the dust. One mistake and they'd all be gone. She thought of her family, her mother's hands, rough but warm, braiding her hair before school. Her brother's laugh, sharp and boyish, the way he used to chase her down dirt roads. She thought of his absence most of all, of the folded flag her mother held, of the silence that hollowed their home after the news came. Her brother's face always came back to her before missions. He was the reason she kept saying yes, even when her chest screamed no. Fear never left her. It sat in her ribs, heavy, relentless. But so did something else. Something she carried in her hands every time she lifted her weapon. Something she didn't need anyone's permission to hold. Courage. At 400 hours they rolled out. Engines low, tires grinding against gravel. The desert still slept under a blanket of stars. The world was hushed, as if even the wind was holding its breath. She sat in the back, her rifle across her lap. Her eyes scanned the horizon, always moving, always searching. No one spoke to her, not directly, but she caught fragments of conversation, nervous jokes, half-serious prayers, the sound of men trying to laugh against the silence pressing in on them. The corporal sat across from her. He noticed her steady hands, the way she checked her weapon twice, then 3 times. He didn't say anything, but his eyes softened. The convoy slowed near the ridge. She tapped the driver's shoulder, then slipped out into the sand, alone. Every step up the slope felt heavier than the last. The ground crumbled beneath her boots, small stones tumbling back down the way she had come. Her breath grew louder inside her helmet, but she kept going. At the top the view opened, wide, endless. The desert stretched out in every direction, silent and merciless. She lay flat, pulling the scope to her eye. The crosshairs found the road below. The convoy, her team. She exhaled, slow, measured. Then she saw it, a shadow where there shouldn't be one, a figure moving too still against the rocks. Ambush. Her chest tightened, but her hands did not shake. She adjusted her aim, held her breath, listened to her heartbeat pound in her ears, and then with a steady squeeze she broke the silence. The shot cracked the dawn open. Below her team froze, confusion swept through them, then chaos. But her scope already found the next target, then the next, each shot steady, deliberate, carrying more than just bullets, carrying the weight of promises, carrying the memory of a brother who would never walk these roads again. The ridge line had been waiting, and she was there to meet it. When the last echo faded, the desert was quiet again. Smoke hung low. The convoy stood still, untouched. Her hands trembled now, but not from fear, from release, from the heavy silence that followed survival. Through the scope she saw the corporal below, staring up toward her ridge. He didn't smile, he didn't cheer. He just lifted a hand, slow, deliberate, a silent thank you. She lowered her weapon. The sun was rising now, burning the horizon gold, and for a moment, just a moment, the weight in her chest eased. But she knew it wasn't over, not yet. Because there was still something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Why did silence feel louder than gunfire? The convoy rolled on, engines rumbling low, the air heavy with smoke and dust. She sat back in her seat now, rifle across her lap, face unreadable. No one spoke to her, not directly, but she felt their eyes. Quiet glances, questions unsaid. It was always the same after she pulled the trigger. Gratitude buried under unease, relief laced with distance, because her hands did what theirs could not, and that made her different. Different was dangerous. The corporal sat across from her again. His gaze met hers for just a second before he looked down at his boots. He didn't speak, but in that silence there was something, respect, or maybe guilt, she couldn't tell. She turned her eyes toward the horizon, letting the desert blur into light and shadow. The sun was climbing now, scorching the sky, erasing the cool of dawn. Heat pressed in, relentless. Sweat slid down her spine, hidden beneath her vest. Her mind replayed the shots one after another, the stillness before each pull of the trigger, the weight that followed. She wondered if the men she'd killed had families, children, brothers who would carry folded flags. The thought pressed against her ribs until she had to look away, until she had to remind herself, it was them or us, always. Still, the question lingered, soft, unspoken. How much of her humanity had bled out with every bullet? The convoy halted by midday, a small outpost. Makeshift walls, sandbags stacked against sunburned stone, the smell of diesel and dust in the air. They were told to rest, to wait. Night would bring movement again. She found a quiet corner, away from the chatter, and set her rifle down. Her hands shook faintly as she unwrapped a ration bar. She wasn't hungry, not really, but she forced herself to take a bite. The taste was chalk, dry and bitter. She closed her eyes. For a moment she was home, in her mother's kitchen. The sound of rain against the roof, her mother humming while stirring soup on the stove, her brother stealing bread from the counter, laughing when she chased him. The memory was sharp, too sharp. She opened her eyes before it could cut deeper. Bootsteps approached. She didn't look up until the shadow fell across her. The corporal. He held his canteen half empty and extended it toward her. "You didn't drink," he said. Not a question, a statement. She hesitated, then took it. The water was warm, metallic, but it slid down her throat like something close to mercy. "Thanks," she said. He nodded, sat beside her, though not too close. Silence stretched. Then he spoke, voice low, almost hesitant. "I lost my brother, too." The words hit harder than any bullet. She turned to him, surprised. His face was still, but his eyes were not. They flicked down, then away, as if the ground could carry his story better than he could. "Kandahar," he added. "IED. They said it was quick. I never believed them." Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but her chest felt locked. She swallowed instead, the silence between them heavy, almost unbearable. Finally she whispered, "Mine was Fallujah." The corporal's eyes lifted. No pity, just recognition, like two scars meeting for the first time. For a moment the bass noises around them faded. The world shrank to two soldiers, carrying ghosts too heavy for their frames. He broke the silence. "You saved us today." She looked down at her hands. Her fingers traced invisible lines across the rifle lying beside her. "Or maybe I just delayed something worse." His jaw tensed. He wanted to argue but didn't. Instead he said, "Doesn't matter, we're still here." The words lodged in her chest, awkward and stubborn, "Still here, for now." That night, under a blanket of stars, the desert changed. Darkness carried new sounds, distant engines, muffled radio static, whispers of movement carried by the wind. She checked her rifle again, slow and steady. Her fear was back, pressing hard against her lungs, but her hands were calm. Always calm. That was her curse. Orders came quietly. "Move at 200, intercept before dawn." She climbed into the vehicle again, the corporal sliding in across from her. Their eyes met briefly. No words, none needed. The desert swallowed them whole as the convoy rolled out. Hours blurred, heat left behind, replaced by a creeping chill. She leaned her head against the steel wall, listening to the engine hum, the crunch of gravel under tires. Her eyes closed briefly, but not in sleep, in focus. She pictured the map, the route, the choke points. She pictured the ridge line again, the lives it had claimed. And she pictured her brother as he used to be, running down that dirt road, calling her name. She whispered it back under her breath. A prayer or a promise, she wasn't sure anymore. The ambush came without warning. A flash, then the world erupted. The explosion tore the night open, hurling sand and metal into the sky. The vehicle lurched, tilted, slammed into the earth with a scream of twisting steel. She hit the wall hard, her breath ripped from her lungs, ears ringing, dust choking her throat. Voices, shouts, the crack of gunfire tearing through the dark. She forced her eyes open. The corporal was there, blood streaked across his forehead, scrambling to pull someone out of the wreckage. She reached for her rifle. Her fingers found it, familiar, steady. She crawled out into the chaos. The night burned red and orange, muzzle flashes slicing the dark. Shadows moved fast, too fast, cutting through the smoke. Her chest screamed with fear. Every instinct begged her to hide. But her hands lifted the rifle. They found targets, they squeezed. Each shot was a heartbeat, each heartbeat a promise. She shouted once, loud enough to be heard, "Fall back to cover." They moved, not because she ordered it, but because survival demanded it. She stayed where she was, exposed, drawing fire. The world narrowed to sound and light, gunfire cracking, sand kicking up, blood pounding in her ears. Then silence. Not complete, not safe, just enough. The attackers pulled back, melting into the desert night. She stayed frozen for a moment, rifle still raised, waiting for the next shadow. But none came. Her breath shook as she lowered the weapon. Her body trembled, every nerve on fire. But her hands were still steady. Around her, the wounded cried out. The corporal knelt beside one man, pressing cloth against a bleeding leg. His eyes flicked up to her, a question in them. She shook her head once. "They'll be back." The words landed heavy. No one argued. The desert night pressed close, thick with smoke and silence. She sat against the wrecked vehicle, rifle resting on her knees, chest rising and falling in uneven waves. Her fear hadn't left, it never would, but neither had her courage. She whispered into the darkness, voice breaking, almost a confession. "I don't know how many times I can do this." No one heard her, except maybe the night. And maybe the ghost of her brother, who stayed with her, unseen. How long can someone carry fear before it becomes part of their blood? The night after the ambush was colder than she expected. The desert always stole its warmth too quickly, leaving nothing but silence and the sharp sting of wind. She sat against the wrecked vehicle, rifle propped against her shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon. Every flicker of shadow felt like a threat. Every gust of sand whispered a warning. Around her, the others patched wounds, whispered orders, tried to believe the worst was behind them. She knew better. She had learned long ago that the worst always waited just out of sight. The corporal sat nearby, wrapping his arm where shrapnel had grazed him. He didn't complain. He didn't curse. Just worked quietly, his face pale under the thin glow of moonlight. She wanted to tell him to rest, to breathe, but her throat wouldn't open. Words, when they mattered most, always felt like they were trapped behind iron. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, and the memories came back. She was 19 again, fresh uniform, too big for her frame, sleeves rolled twice just to see her hands. She had been proud then, naive, believed in posters, in speeches, in the weight of medals she hadn't yet earned. Her brother had teased her, "You won't even make it through basic." But he'd smiled when he said it, the kind of smile that dared her to prove him wrong. And she had. She pushed through the mud, the shouting, the endless drills. She had swallowed pain and exhaustion and turned them into fuel. Every time she wanted to quit, she pictured his grin, his voice telling her she couldn't. That was enough to keep her moving. Then came the phone call. She had been on base when the chaplain found her. His face carried the news before his mouth spoke it. She remembered the words, every one of them, though they blurred into a fog she couldn't escape. "Your brother, roadside bomb, he didn't make it." The world collapsed into silence, a silence that has never fully lifted. Her mother's sobs had filled the house for weeks. The sound still haunted her, worse than any explosion, any gunshot. And in that silence, a promise was born. She would finish what he couldn't. She would carry him with her, every step, every shot, every mission. But promises came with weight, and the weight never left. She opened her eyes. The desert was still there. The night was still heavy, and fear was still sitting in her chest, whispering that tomorrow would take more names. The corporal's voice broke through the quiet. "You ever wonder if it's worth it?" She turned to him slowly. His face was tired, shadows under his eyes, his bandage already stained. He didn't wait for her answer. "Sometimes I think we're just plugging holes in a dam that's already cracked. We save one convoy, one outpost, one ridge line, and the water just keeps coming." She said nothing at first. The truth was too raw, too close to what she thought herself. Finally, she whispered, "If I let myself believe that, I wouldn't be here." He studied her, his mouth opened like he wanted to ask more, but then he just nodded, a quiet surrender. Dawn came slow, painting the sky with pale orange. The outpost radio cracked with static, voices urgent. Reinforcements were still hours away. The convoy needed to move again, wounded and all. She checked her weapon. The rhythm of it calmed her. Magazine, chamber, scope, every click and snap grounding her in something she could control. The corporal limped toward her, rifle slung across his back. "They want you on point." She nodded, no surprise. When fear walked with you, people learned to send you first. The convoy moved at half speed, crawling across the sand like prey too injured to run. Every turn in the road felt like a trap, every ridge line a hiding place. Her eyes scanned constantly, never resting, her finger brushing the trigger guard like a nervous prayer. Hours passed. The desert stretched endless. The heat returned, baking the earth, pressing down on shoulders already bent with exhaustion. And then silence again. Not the natural kind, not the wind or the heat, a silence that felt heavy, intentional. She froze, raised her fist. The convoy stopped, engines cut. Her scope swept the horizon. Sand, rocks, heat waves, nothing. But she felt it in her bones. She whispered to herself, "Something's wrong." The corporal came up beside her, squinting into the glare. "I don't see anything." "That's the problem," she said. And then she saw it, just a flicker, a glint too sharp, too precise, glass catching light where there should be none. "Sniper!" Her breath caught, but her hands moved without hesitation. She dropped low, sighted in, exhaled. The crosshairs aligned. For a heartbeat, the desert held still, just her and the glass, two unseen soldiers locked in silence. She squeezed the trigger. The shot shattered the stillness. The glint vanished, dust plumed where the figure had been. The corporal exhaled sharply, a sound like disbelief. "You just saved us again." She shook her head, her voice was flat. "No, I just started something worse." Because the silence didn't return. Gunfire erupted from the ridge. Shadows poured from behind rocks. The convoy was under attack again, louder, closer, more relentless than before. She hit the ground, rifle pressed to her shoulder, eyes cutting through smoke and sand. Every shot she fired carried weight, but the numbers against them were overwhelming. Shouts filled the air. Someone screamed for a medic. Engines roared as drivers tried to push forward through chaos. She crawled to cover, breath ragged, heart slamming. Fear gripped her chest, fierce and merciless, but her hands stayed steady. The corporal dropped beside her, firing bursts toward the ridge. His face was grim, teeth clenched, eyes wild with focus. "They're pinning us down," he shouted. She didn't answer. She was already moving, shifting her scope, finding the angles no one else could see. She picked targets not at random but deliberate, the ones pushing forward, the ones driving the others. Each pull of the trigger bought seconds, seconds the convoy needed, seconds her people needed. But seconds weren't enough. She felt it in her chest, the slow, creeping truth. They couldn't hold, not here, not like this. She glanced at the corporal. "We need to break them." He fired again, jaw set. "How?" Her eyes swept the ridge. Her mind calculated distances, angles, risks. And then she saw it, the one place the attackers had built their strength. A cluster of vehicles, half hidden, loaded with ammunition. She knew what she had to do, and she knew what it meant. Her chest tightened, fear screamed, but her hands gripped the rifle tighter, steadier. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "I'll carry this one." The corporal turned to her, confusion in his eyes. "What are you?" She didn't let him finish. She moved. Low crawl through sand, bullets snapping overhead, heat biting her skin, her scope locked on the vehicles, her breath slowed, heartbeat steady. She knew this shot could change everything, could end the ambush, could save them all. but it would also ignite something she might not walk away from. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and just before she pulled, she thought of her brother, his laugh, his dare, his smile. Her hand squeezed. The world erupted. What does it feel like to set the desert on fire with a single bullet? The answer came faster than she could breathe. Her shot tore into the vehicle's ammunition stash, and in the next instant the world roared. The ridge exploded in flames. Heat punched the air, a shockwave rippling across the sand, flinging dust and bodies into chaos. She was thrown back hard, the ground slamming into her ribs, ears ringing with a sound that seemed too big for the earth to contain. The horizon itself looked split, black smoke curling skyward, tongues of fire twisting like serpents into the dawn. For a second, maybe two, there was silence, the stunned kind. Then came the screams. The attackers scattered, their formation shattered, their shouts tangled with panic. But not all of them ran. Some kept firing, wild and desperate, bullets tearing the sand around her. Her hands found her rifle again. Her chest heaved with fear, but her fingers didn't betray her. She rolled, sighted, fired. 3 shots, 3 silhouettes dropping into the dust. "Cover the left," someone shouted. "Medic." The convoy roared back to life. Soldiers scrambled behind tires and broken metal, weapons raised. For the first time, they weren't just defending. They were pushing. Her single shot had cracked the attack wide open. But victory didn't taste like triumph. It tasted like smoke in her throat, grit between her teeth, the knowledge of what she'd just done. Because fire wasn't clean, it wasn't precise, it didn't care who stood in its path. Her chest knotted as she scanned the ridge. Shadows writhed in the flames, some crawling, some still. She couldn't tell who was enemy, who was caught too close, who might have been just a boy ordered into a fight. The corporal dropped beside her, panting, his bandage darker now, sweat and blood mingling on his face. "You did it." She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the flames. He followed her gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he whispered, like a confession, "Sometimes I don't know if surviving feels like winning." She looked at him. His eyes were tired, older than his years, and in them she saw her own reflection. The firefight thinned. The attackers, those who could, melted into the desert, leaving only smoke and silence behind. The convoy regrouped, shaken but alive. She exhaled. The weight in her chest shifted, but it didn't lift. It never did. Hours later, when the sun was high and merciless, they limped into a fortified checkpoint, battered, burned, but breathing. Medics rushed forward. Orders barked. The wounded were pulled aside, their groans carried into makeshift tents. She stayed outside, leaning against her rifle, staring at nothing. Her hands were black with soot, her uniform scorched at the shoulder. The smell of fire clung to her skin, inescapable. Someone approached, not the corporal this time. The colonel. His face was stone, unreadable, but his eyes flicked to the ridge lying miles behind them. "You're the reason they made it," he said. "Not praise, just fact." She shook her head once. "I'm the reason they burned." The colonel's jaw flexed. He didn't argue. He just held her gaze for a moment longer, then walked away. She sank onto a crate, elbows on her knees, hands pressed to her face. For the first time since dawn, she let herself breathe unevenly. The image of flames replayed behind her eyes. The silence afterward was worse than the fire itself. The corporal sat beside her eventually. No words, just presence. Sometimes that was the only language soldiers had left. Night fell heavy. The checkpoint settled into uneasy quiet, interrupted by distant radios and the low hum of generators. She lay on her cot but didn't close her eyes. Sleep wasn't possible, not after today. Instead, she replayed it all, the trigger, the fire, the way her chest had clenched when she realized what she'd done. And beneath it, deeper than the fear, deeper than the regret, was something else. Resolve. Because she knew the truth, tomorrow would come. and with it another road, another ridge, another ambush. She whispered into the dark, barely audible, "I'll carry it." Her voice cracked on the words, but they held. Morning brought orders. Recon, sweep the perimeter. The desert was never still for long. She walked point again, boots crunching over gravel, rifle steady against her shoulder. The corporal trailed a few paces back, limping but refusing to stay behind. The horizon stretched endless, heat waves already rising. For hours there was nothing, just sand, wind, silence. And then tracks, fresh, leading toward a cluster of ruins half buried in the dunes. She froze, lifted her fist. The patrol halted. Her chest tightened. Something in those ruins felt wrong, too quiet, too still. The corporal stepped up beside her, his breath uneven. "What do you see?" She didn't answer. Her scope swept slowly, edges of crumbled walls, shadows that didn't move with the wind. Then a flicker, a child. She blinked, heart hammering. A small figure darted between walls, quick, thin, carrying something in both hands. Her breath caught. It wasn't a weapon, it was a jug, water. Her chest ached. For a moment the war fell away, replaced by something painfully human, a child trying to survive. But the ruins weren't safe. They never were. If a child was there, others were too, and not all would be carrying water. She whispered to the corporal, voice low, strained, "We can't fire unless we're sure." He nodded. "Then what?" Her eyes stayed on the ruins, on the child, on the shadows beyond. Fear pressed hard against her ribs, but her hands gripped her rifle steady. She knew the truth. This wasn't just about enemies. It was about choices, the kind that carved into your soul and never left. The kind her brother never lived long enough to face. The child disappeared into the shadows. The ruins stayed quiet. She lowered her rifle, slow, deliberate. Her chest burned with the weight of the decision. The corporal glanced at her, question in his eyes. She whispered, "Not today." The patrol moved on, the ruins shrinking behind them. She carried the image of the child with her, carried it like she carried everything else: fear, regret, courage, promise. Later, when they returned, someone asked if she'd seen anything. She just said, "Nothing we couldn't walk away from." No one pressed her. That night, lying awake again, she thought of the child, of her brother, of all the faces she had carried. And she realized something. Courage wasn't always pulling the trigger. Sometimes it was the choice not to. She turned on her side, eyes open in the dark, whispering again to the ghost that never left her, "I'll keep carrying it, until it's too heavy." The silence didn't answer, but in it she found a fragile kind of peace. For now, dawn stretched pale and colorless across the desert. The air was cold at first light, but it would not last. Soon, heat would press down again, relentless, turning sand into fire beneath boots. She sat alone on a stack of crates, her rusted scope cradled in her hands. She had cleaned it the night before, wiped away the soot and the blood-stained dust, polished the cracked glass until it caught the morning sun. But no matter how hard she scrubbed, she couldn't wash out the fire she had seen through it. The convoy was quiet now, though it was a brittle quiet. Soldiers moved stiffly, still nursing wounds, still glancing at the ridge that had burned. There was gratitude in their eyes when they looked at her, gratitude she did not want. Because she knew the truth. They were alive because she had lit the desert on fire, and fire never burned clean. The corporal hobbled over, leaning heavier on his stick today, his bandages freshly wrapped. He lowered himself beside her, his face pale but steady. "Orders came in," he said. She didn't answer at once. Her fingers traced the edge of the scope. "Where?" "Forward, south. We're escorting supply rigs to Fort Avaris. Intelligence says they've been cutting the road there for weeks." Her throat tightened. She had heard the stories. Fort Avaris was a skeleton garrison, starved of supplies, holding the line with rifles older than the soldiers who carried them. If they fell, the entire southern defense would collapse. "How many men?" she asked. The corporal gave a bitter laugh. "As many as they could scrape together. Not enough." Her chest sank. It was always not enough. They moved out by noon. Trucks groaned under weight they could barely carry, engines coughing smoke into the sky. Dust rose with every wheel, a long trail across the barren land. She walked point again. The rusted scope glinted on her rifle, the weight of it more than metal. Behind her, she could feel the convoy's trust pressing like a burden between her shoulder blades. Every step felt heavier. Hours passed. The sun turned brutal, sand shimmered, her lips cracked. The horizon stayed empty, but emptiness was a trick. She had learned that too well. Then came the sound, low at first. A hum carried on the wind. She froze, hand raised. The convoy halted. The hum grew, engines not theirs. Her chest thudded once hard. She dropped to one knee, scope rising to her eye. There, South Ridge, dust clouds, vehicles fast, too many. Her pulse quickened, but her breathing slowed. She counted, 10, 15, maybe more, armed, maneuvering to cut the road. The convoy behind her shifted nervously. Someone cursed under their breath. The corporal limped up beside her. "How bad?" She whispered, "Bad enough." The colonel's voice crackled on comms. "Positions, dig in, they'll hit us in minutes." Chaos snapped into motion. Soldiers scrambled, drivers swung trucks into hasty barricades, sandbags spilled into uneven walls. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. She stayed still, scope steady, breath even. Through the cracked lens, she saw their lead vehicle crest the ridge, an armored carrier, turret glinting in the sun. Behind it, dust plumes rose higher. Her finger brushed the trigger, her chest clenched. And in that instant, she remembered the child in the ruins, the jug of water, the small, fragile humanity caught between guns. Her throat ached, but her eyes stayed on the scope. The corporal whispered beside her, voice low, urgent, "If you've got the shot, take it." She exhaled slowly. The world narrowed to her eye, the crack in the glass, the armored vehicle's turret. Her brother's voice echoed in memory, faint, a ghost. "Every bullet you fire, sis, you carry forever." Her finger tightened. The rifle barked. The scope snapped against her cheek. The armored vehicle's turret exploded in sparks, the machine lurching sideways into the sand. Soldiers tumbled out, scrambling, shouting. She chambered another round, fired, one dropped, another fell. The desert roared alive. Gunfire crackled from both ridges, tracer rounds streaking the sky. The convoy answered with everything they had, the air tearing with noise. She didn't stop. Shot after shot, through smoke and dust, through fear and regret. Each target that fell carved deeper into her, but she didn't hesitate. She couldn't. Because behind her, soldiers clung to life. Because Fort Avaris was waiting. Because her brother wasn't here to fire instead. The corporal's rifle snapped beside her. Left flank, they're pushing hard. She swung, scope catching shapes through the haze. Fired again, missed, fired again, a scream. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though it was minutes. Sweat stung her eyes, her shoulder bruised from recoil, her chest burning with every breath. And then silence. The ridge was empty, the dust settled, the enemy was gone. The convoy was still standing, barely, trucks pocked with holes, soldiers bleeding and pale but alive. Her rifle lowered slowly, her hands shook. She didn't feel triumph, only weight. The corporal leaned against the barricade, panting, face streaked with sweat and dirt. He looked at her, eyes raw. "If you weren't here." She shook her head, cutting him off. "Don't." He fell silent. The colonel approached, helmet in hand, his face lined deeper than before. "You bought us Fort Avaris," he said. His voice was low, grave. "But you're running out of pieces to give." She didn't answer. Her eyes drifted to the horizon, where the smoke of battle still lingered like a scar against the sky. That night under the stars, she lay awake again. Her rifle rested beside her, scope dark and cracked, reflecting faint starlight. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I'll carry it." But this time the words trembled. Because she knew the truth. One day soon the weight might break her. And when it did, she didn't know if anyone would be left to pick it up. Why did Fort Evaris look more like a graveyard than a stronghold? The trucks rattled through its gates at dusk, and the sight silenced even the loudest men. Sand-caked walls leaned as if too tired to hold themselves up. Antennas sagged, broken, their wires tangled like veins pulled loose. The flag above the command post hung in tatters, whipped thin by months of desert wind. And the soldiers, those who remained, were thinner than the flag. They moved slowly, their uniforms faded, their eyes hollow. Some were barely more than boys, rifles slung over shoulders that seemed too narrow to carry them. Others limped on makeshift crutches, bandages long soaked through, faces sunken. She saw them and felt her chest ache, because in their faces she saw her brother, the same gaunt look he'd worn before the fever took him, the same unspoken question in his eyes, "Will I see tomorrow?" The convoy parked in the courtyard. Relief flickered across the garrison's faces at the sight of supplies, but it was faint. Relief was a luxury they'd forgotten. The colonel barked orders. Men unloaded crates. Medics rushed to tend the wounded. For a while, the fort was alive again, a fragile heartbeat against the silence of the desert. She stood apart, rifle still slung across her back, scope cracked but faithful. Her hands itched with the memory of the last battle. Her ears still rang from gunfire. But worse than all of it was the look in the garrison's eyes, gratitude so deep it cut. Because she knew what they didn't. Gratitude had teeth. It bound you. It demanded you keep carrying even when you had nothing left. A voice broke her thoughts. "You the sniper." She turned. A soldier no older than 19 stood there, helmet too big for his head, rifle clutched awkwardly. His smile was small, uncertain. They said, "You saved the convoy." She wanted to tell him no. She wanted to tell him saving was just another word for burning everything down. But his eyes were shining, and she didn't want to steal that light. "Yeah," she said quietly. He nodded. "I want to fight like you." The words hit her harder than any bullet. She managed a tight smile, but inside something cracked. No, she thought, not like me, never like me. Later in the mess hall, she sat with the corporal. The walls smelled of dust and oil. A single dim bulb swung overhead. "They'll come again," he said flatly, chewing on a ration bar as if it were sand. "Supplies like this, it paints a target. Command knows it." She rubbed her temples, her head pounded. How many days? Not days, hours. Silence stretched. The corporal leaned closer. "You don't look right. You've been carrying too much. You need to." She cut him off with a sharp glance. "Don't." But he didn't back down. His voice dropped to a whisper. "If you break, we all break." Her breath caught. She wanted to scream at him that she was breaking, that every time she pulled the trigger, a piece of her shattered, that at night she saw the faces, enemies, friends, strangers, all the same in the dark. But she didn't scream. She just swallowed the words and stared at the table until her vision blurred. When the alarm came, it was almost a relief. Sirens wailed through the fort, shrill and desperate. Boots thundered on stone. Shouts echoed. South wall movement. She rose, rifle in hand, body moving on instinct, though her soul wanted nothing more than to stop. On the wall, the desert spread endless under moonlight, and out there, like a tide in the dark, shapes moved. Dozens, maybe hundreds, shadows slipping over the dunes, silent but steady. Her heart stumbled. The young soldier from earlier climbed up beside her, trembling but trying to look steady. His helmet still sat loose, sliding over his brow. His hands shook on his rifle. She wanted to tell him to run, to hide, to survive, but no words came, only silence. The corporal appeared at her side, rifle ready, eyes grim. "It's worse than last time," he muttered. She lifted her scope, cracked glass, blurred vision, but clear enough. She saw weapons glint. She saw banners ripple. She saw death marching closer. Her chest tightened until it hurt. She whispered more to herself than anyone, "I can't do this again." The corporal heard. He turned sharp, searching her face. "You don't have a choice." But she did. For the first time since this began, she realized she had won. She could lower the rifle. She could step back. She could let someone else carry it, even if it killed them all. Her hands shook on the weapon. The decision clawed at her. Her brother's voice whispered in memory, soft, weary, "You don't always have to be the strong one." She almost believed it. Then the first shot rang out from the dark, and belief ended. The wall exploded in sparks. Soldiers shouted. Rifles cracked. The night lit with muzzle flashes. And she raised her rifle again. The cracked scope caught her eye and the world narrowed. She fired once, twice, 3 times. Targets dropped. Her soul screamed against it, but her hands didn't stop. Because the boy beside her was firing too, and missing, and shaking so badly he would die without her. Because the corporal was bleeding again, and gritting his teeth and still standing. Because Fortivaris had nothing left but her. The night burned alive with battle, and in the middle of it she carried her fear in her chest, but in her hands, trembling, bloodied hands, she carried courage. And that was the only thing keeping them all alive. The night did not end. Hours blurred into a single roar of fire and smoke. Bullets clawed sparks from the stone. Mortars split the walls with thunder. The air turned into dust and iron, choking every breath. And still Fortivaris stood. She knelt behind the shattered parapet, rifle steady, scope cracked but faithful. Her cheek was bruised, her shoulder battered, but her hands never stilled. Each pull of the trigger was another second stolen from death. But death never ran out of patience. The young soldier beside her was pale, sweat cutting rivers through the dirt on his face. His helmet had slipped back again, exposing wide, terrified eyes. He fired wildly, missing more than he hit but refusing to stop. "Slow," she shouted over the chaos. "Breathe, aim." He tried, he really tried. His rifle barked, his lips trembled with the rhythm of prayer. A mortar landed near the south wall. Stone collapsed, screams tore the air. She swung her rifle, dropped 2 silhouettes moving into the breach. But there were more, always more. Her chest was tight, her throat raw, each breath burned like smoke. Her mind begged her to stop, to put down the rifle, to walk away. But her hands didn't listen. Then she heard it. A scream. Not from the wall, from the courtyard below. She risked a glance. The boy had slipped. His foot had caught on twisted rebar and he'd fallen from the parapet into the open below. His rifle skittered away. He lay sprawled, exposed, a fragile figure against the dirt. And through her scope she saw movement, shadows breaking off from the ridge, 5, 6, running straight for him. Her heart seized. The corporal shouted from somewhere behind her, voice hoarse, "Hold the wall, don't leave the line." But the boy was down there, alone. Her brother's face flickered in her memory, pale, feverish, reaching for water he never lived to drink. She remembered whispering, "I'll protect you," a promise she'd failed to keep. Not this time. She dropped from the parapet without thinking. Boots hit dirt hard. Pain lanced her knee, but she kept moving. She grabbed the boy's vest, dragging him toward the cover of a sandbag wall as bullets spit dust around them. "Stay down," she shouted. His eyes were wide with terror. I lost my rifle." She shoved her own into his hands. "Then use mine." He froze, trembling. "But what about you?" She pulled the rusted scope from her pocket. The glass cracked, the frame dented, but it still glinted under the firelight. She pressed it into his palm, closing his fingers around it. "Doesn't matter," she whispered. "Just breathe, aim." She turned, pulling the corporal's sidearm from his belt where it had fallen near the rubble. One pistol, One magazine, that was all. The shadows closed in, 6 of them, rifles raised, faces hard with firelight. She fired once, twice, 3 times. One fell, another staggered. The pistol kicked against her wrist, harsh and small compared to her rifle's weight. The boy, shaking, lifted her weapon. The scope caught moonlight. He exhaled. He fired. One enemy dropped. Her chest swelled with something sharp, painful, not pride, not relief, something deeper. Another round hissed past her ear. She ducked, rolled, fired again. The pistol clicked empty. The last 2 enemies charged. She stood, body screaming, and met them head-on. The first slammed into her. The world spun. She tasted blood, but she drove her elbow into his throat, snatched his rifle, and fired point-blank into his chest. The second raised a blade, a glint of steel in the firelight. She swung the rifle up, blocking the strike. Pain tore through her arm, but she shoved forward, teeth gritted, until the blade clattered to the dirt. The boy fired again. The last shadow fell. And then silence. For a moment all she could hear was her heartbeat, wild and broken. She dropped to her knees, gasping. The boy crawled to her side, clutching her rifle, the scope pressed against his chest like a relic. His eyes brimmed with tears. "You saved me." She wanted to tell him no, that she hadn't saved him, that she'd only delayed the weight he would one day carry, but she couldn't. She just placed a shaking hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Stay alive. That's enough." Above them the fort still burned. The battle raged on. The corporal shouted orders, soldiers scrambled to plug the breach. But down here, for a heartbeat, time stood still. Her brother's voice echoed faintly in her mind, softer now, almost at peace. "You kept your promise." Her eyes stung. She closed them. When she opened them again, the night was not over. The enemy was still coming, the fort was still dying, and she was almost gone. But she would keep standing, because the boy had her rifle, because the fort still had breath, because courage, no matter how broken, was still courage. And sometimes that was enough to save them all. The dawn came red. Not soft, not gentle, but bleeding across the sky, washing the fort in the color of wounds. Smoke clung to the walls, drifting like torn shrouds. The air reeked of gunpowder and burnt stone. She stood on the parapet again, body trembling, eyes hollow. The boy knelt beside her, clutching her rifle as though it was a lifeline. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, but his aim was steadier now. The corporal leaned against the wall, his side bandaged clumsily, pale with loss of blood. Yet he smiled faintly at her, a silent nod. They were still alive, for now. But the horizon told another story. Out there shadows moved again, more than before, twice as many. A tide that would not stop until the fort was nothing but dust. Her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. She felt the weight of the night behind her, the lives saved, the lives lost, the cracks in her soul that would never heal. She wanted to sit down, to close her eyes, to rest just once. But the boy lifted her rifle and whispered, voice trembling, "Show me where to aim." And suddenly she understood. It was never about her surviving. It was about passing the courage forward, piece by piece, until the weight wasn't hers alone. She knelt beside him, pointing with a shaking hand. "There, wait for the flash, don't rush." The boy nodded, jaw set. The corporal gritted his teeth, raising his own weapon. Soldiers along the wall did the same, battered but unbroken. And then the storm broke. The enemy surged like floodwater, roaring, firing, tearing through the desert with relentless force. Mortars screamed overhead, walls shuddered, rifles cracked in deafening rhythm. The boy fired, his shot found its mark. Her chest swelled with something fierce and sharp, pride, pain, both at once. She fired the corporal's rifle until it clicked empty, then another, then nothing left but silence and dust. The breach at the south wall split open again. Enemy poured through, swarming, overwhelming. And she knew this was it. She looked at the boy. His hands shook, but his eyes burned steady now. She saw her brother in him. She saw herself. She saw the promise she had finally kept. She rose, slow and deliberate, pulling the last grenade from her vest. The corporal's voice caught, "Don't." She silenced him with a look, a tired smile. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak," she whispered. "It simply acts." She ran. Into the breach, into the flood of shadows, into the storm of bullets. The explosion tore the morning apart. For a heartbeat, the desert went silent. When the dust cleared, the breach was gone. The enemy scattered, retreating into the dunes. The fort still stood. But she did not. Only her rusted scope remained, cracked glass glinting faintly in the red light of dawn. The boy found it hours later, clutching it to his chest with trembling hands. The corporal placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice low, heavy. "Carry it for her." The boy nodded, tears streaking down his face, rifle heavy in his grip. And above Fort Avaris, the wind shifted. The flag, tattered and torn, caught the light once more. She carried fear in her chest, courage in her hands, and that saved them all. Silence followed, the kind that lingers long after the story ends.